So the next thing we'll install are our pots. And we're not going to be soldering these up right now, but we need to get these in place so that we can also install our ground wire against the bridge. Basically, you've got two pots. We've got a volume pot and a tone pot. The tone pot will have the green capacitor on it. So generally place these inside facing each other. And you'll typically have two ground wires, and the way you can tell which are the grounds, they'll both be soldered to the back of the pot. So this red wire here is, if I just get that out of the way, the red wire you can see, which I'll pull that out so you can have a look. The red wire here is attached to the second lug, and that's the wiper or the output for the volume. So we know that's not the ground. And the other two wires, one ground wire for the input jack and one ground wire for the bridge. Now you generally pick the longest. These two are both the same length almost. So I'm going to run the black. And if you see, I'll bring the camera down. You see inside the electronics cavity, you see a hole through the corner there. I'm just going to install or insert the wire through there and push it through, and that will come up through the pickup cavity. These two wires run through the input jack hole for now. So I'll just bring the camera back up. So what I'd normally do is just run these two wires through the input jack hole to the side of the body. Once they're in place, you can tape those off against the body just so that they're not in the way. Just tape those off to the side of the guitar. And we've got to be a little careful with this next step. So what we want to do is hold the pots with our fingers as we tip the guitar over. And as you can see, we've got this black earth wire running through the cavity. We can then run that through the small hole in the side of the cavity. And we'll just see that. If I bring the camera down, you should just start to see that wire coming out through here. And what I recommend from there then, once you can see that wire, just try and bend it back so it's in place. Once you've got that secured, we can install our bridge. So just have it, the lip of the wire just sitting above as we push that in. And then as we put the bushing in place, that will be hard against it. Now in many cases these will be quite tight and you will need to use a mallet or something similar to get it in place. Definitely have a piece of timber or something to protect the top of the bushing and just tap into place like so. And our bridge will just sit in place like so. But we'll be putting that on later because we need the tension from the strings to secure that in place. The last component we need to install is our P90 pickup. So the wires go closest to the pickup cavity and the wires go through the hole in the side of the pickup cavity into the electronics cavity. But what you'll find, that hole is often difficult to poke these wires through. So what I'd recommend, especially if you've tried and you've had a bit of trouble getting the wires through, just tip the guitar over and taking one of the strings that came with your guitar kit, just poke the ball end through the hole from the electronics cavity into the pickup cavity and turn the guitar over and just loop the wires through the ball end of the string. Just simply pull that through like so. Okay, so once the wires are through, you see there's a little bit of play with the pickup and the pickup cavity. So we want to make sure we get that pickup aligned perfectly. What I'd recommend doing next is taking your bridge, put your low E and high E string on. Now this is a wraparound bridge, which means we need to insert from underneath and it wraps around and sits in the saddle like so. I'd put the low E and the high E onto the bridge first. Then put the bridge in place. Quickly tighten those strings. Remember, the bridge will be on a slant, and that's fine. We'll need to change this, obviously. The slant should be leaning back the other way. We need to compensate for the thicker strings, not the smaller strings. Okay, so that should be all our hardware installed. So next we'll move on to wiring up the guitar, and from there we'll do a final setup. So what I've done here, I've just loosened the volume pot. I'm just going to put a rag under that just to protect the finish. And I've got a little template I use for soldering, just to keep the pots in place. You don't really need anything like that. You could use a section of the foam lid that your guitar actually came in if you need. And one of the next things we need to do is tin our wires. So because I've already tinned the end of the soldering iron, I'm just going to run the edge of these wires just through the solder, and that should give us a nice coating of solder on that wire, which should help bond or help the connections. So our first wire is our ground wire. We need to stick that to the back of the pot. So what I'm going to do is just get some solder. Now your kit should come with more than enough solder. Make sure you're doing this to the volume pot, not the tone pot. The way to tell, the tone pot is the one with the capacitor attached to it. I'm just trying to leave a little puddle of solder there. All I'm trying to do is just connect that earth wire to the back of that pot. That's really all we need to do. Now the last wire is the last wire for the volume pot, I should say, is our active wire. Just press that lug down a little bit just so it's easier to get to. Obviously need to be really careful of the finish of our guitar. If you can, just try and thread that wire through the eyelet of the lug. Just bend that back a little, and that should hold that in place for your soldered connection to be made. Again, I'm going to be very careful of the finish here. I don't want any hot solder dripping on my guitar. Just going to apply some heat to that lug first. And just drip a little bit of solder on there. Test the connection. It's a good strong connection. So from here, I'll just reinstall our pot. And it's important you have good strong connection, so just check once you've completed soldering. Let's quickly connect that pot back up again. And I'm just going to secure that volume pot back in place. Next, we need to solder up our wires to our input jack. So I'm just waiting for the soldering iron to heat up again. It's always best if you have a period where you're not going to be soldering for 5, 10, 15 minutes. I'd turn the soldering iron off. It's better to reheat it. I'm just going to strip these wires back a little bit as well, and then we'll tin those as well. Just while I'm waiting for the soldering iron to heat up, I'm just going to check also going to check the fitting of our electronics cavity plate. Just check the fit of that plate. Often you do need to sand down just a little. I'm just going to remove a little bit of that edge. So I've just got some sandpaper here. Essentially just removing around the edge and that just around the curve. Often doesn't take too much. This was pretty close. Okay, that's fitting now. And again, like the pickguard, the chamfer will be at the top. So I'll put that in place and just mark my pilot holes before I install that. I won't bother screwing that in place just yet. We'll test the electronics before we close the cavity up. Okay, so our soldering iron should be nice and warm now. Just move the guitar slightly. So as I said, I want to tin both these wires, and I'll tin both lugs that we're going to connect to. So I'll just test the heat of the soldering iron. So from here, just remember our red wire is our active wire, or our hot wire. So I'm putting that to the outside lug. Just give that a twist. Our green wire is our earth, and it's going to the lug connected to the inner sleeve. So once those are both in place, I'm just going to heat up the lug with the active wire first. And then secondly, live wire. Just both of those, good and strong. And from there, I'll just be installing the input jack. Again, I'll be drilling some pilot holes and installing that as we've installed all the rest of the hardware. So I won't bother filming that, but it's really the same thing. We're just going to be marking our holes, drilling with pilot holes, and installing our screws. And I'll do the same with the plastic cover.